The email came on a Tuesday. Subject line, policy reminder. Equipment boundaries. Kesha was still wiping down the lab floor when Jennifer Walsh from HR approached, heels clicking like punctuation marks. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that felt like being cornered. "Hi, Kesha. Mind stepping into my office for just a moment?" She followed quietly, knowing the script already. Jennifer gestured to a chair, but didn't wait for her to sit before launching in. "We've had a few concerns," she began, voice coated in something that pretended to be empathy. "Apparently, you've been observed standing near technical equipment, reviewing documents, spending extended time around the prototype." Kesha blinked once. "I clean the lab." "Of course," Jennifer said quickly, folding her hands like she was praying no one recorded this. "But even standing too close can be interpreted as a safety violation. Or worse, tampering." There it was. The word they didn't want to say: sabotage. Kesha didn't argue, didn't explain. She just nodded and left the office with the kind of quiet that makes people nervous. But that was the final straw. Later that afternoon, Derek shouted from across the lab, "Hey, princess, stay away from the engine. We don't need it catching feelings too." More laughter. Someone filmed it again. The group chat buzzed with another round of ridicule. This time, Kesha didn't walk away. She turned slowly, one hand still on the mop, and met Derek's eyes with a calm, so still it made the room feel colder. "You think I'm here to impress you?" she asked. The room fell quiet, the joke suspended in midair. "I come in before sunrise. I scrub your floors, wipe your tables, clean up your messes, and every day you look at me like I'm furniture. But the truth is," she paused, then said it softly, so softly it cut deeper, "I know more about that engine than all of you combined. You just never bothered to ask." The silence wasn't just awkward now, it was shaken. Derek tried to laugh it off. "So what, you're a cleaning lady and an engineer now?" Kesha looked at him and smiled. Not the kind that seeks approval, but the kind that knows something he doesn't. "No," she said. "I'm just someone who listens, which is more than I can say for the people running this place." She turned back to her work without another word, but something had shifted, in her, and in them, because the woman they mocked with jokes and warnings wasn't just standing in a lab anymore. She was standing in their blind spot, and she wasn't leaving. "Let's settle this," Derek said, loud enough to pull every head in the lab toward him. "Since our cleaning specialist seems to think she's got the answers, how about a little wager?" Kesha was organizing supplies along the back wall, pretending not to hear, but the tone in his voice, it wasn't curiosity, it was performance. Brad Mitchell grinned, already pulling out his phone to record. Michael Chun crossed his arms. Jennifer Walsh appeared in the doorway, sipping her tea like it was theater. Derek took a few slow steps toward the engine, then turned to face the room. "This machine has stumped every expert in the country for a decade. 10 years, $50 million, zero progress. And now," he gestured toward her, "our cleaning lady claims she knows something." Laughter rippled through the lab, cautious but hungry. "So here's the deal," Derek said, eyes locked on Kesha. "If you can tell us right here, right now, what's wrong with this engine, we'll each pay you $100. But if you're wrong," he let the silence stretch, "you never step foot in this lab again." Whispers swirled like smoke. The stakes were clear: public humiliation or permanent exile. Kesha turned slowly, her expression unreadable. For a second she looked at the engine, not the people, not the phones, but the machine. Then she said, calmly, "I accept." The room stiffened. Derek's smirk faltered for just a beat. "You, what?" "I accept the bet," she repeated. "Let's find out who's actually been listening." Jennifer nearly choked on her tea. Mitchell laughed nervously. "She's serious." Kesha stepped forward. Her hands weren't shaking. Her voice didn't rise. There was no fire, no fury, just a terrifying calm, like the eye of a storm that knew exactly where it was going. Word spread fast. Within 5 minutes, employees from other floors filtered in. Engineers leaned on stools, whispering. A tech assistant wheeled in a whiteboard, just in case she wanted to draw her dreams. Someone muttered, "She's gonna crash and burn." Someone else whispered, "She's got guts." Then came the voice no one expected. "Mind if I observe?" All eyes turned. Thomas Reed stood at the back of the room, hands behind his back. Retired senior consultant. Legend in propulsion systems. He hadn't been to Apex in months. No one knew he was even on site. Derek stammered. "Of course, Mr. Reed. This is all just in good fun." Reed didn't smile. He just looked at Kesha. "You've got 15 minutes, he said softly. "Let's see what the janitor's daughter can do." And suddenly, it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a reckoning. It sat in the center of the lab like a tomb. The prototype. Apex's shame. A $50 million promise turned into a decade of failure. They called it Project Titan, once. Now they barely called it anything at all. 10 years of consultants' rewires, recalibrations, software patches, 10 years of theories, airflow discrepancies, software bugs, atmospheric variables, voltage misalignments, all dead ends. At one point, it had its own task force. Now it was just a piece of metal the interns joked about during coffee breaks. But Kesha watched it differently. She cleaned around it every day. Moved carefully, respectfully, like it was something still alive, just forgotten. There was a heaviness to the way it slumped, wires coiled like veins with no pulse. But she noticed things the engineers didn't. A change in how heat clung to one panel. The way certain bolts never quite aligned with the others. Dust patterns that told her what air wasn't moving. She remembered her grandfather's words. Engines talk, girl. But not to everyone. Most saw a machine that had failed. She saw a puzzle waiting for someone with enough patience to stop guessing and start listening. Sometimes when no one was looking, she'd wipe down its frame extra slow, fingers lingering over the intake manifold. She wasn't trying to fix it. Not yet. She just needed to understand it, what it was trying to say. The engineers barely glanced at it anymore. They gave it a wide berth, like an open grave. To them the embarrassment was historical. Something to reference with a shrug or a joke, a sunken cost. Derek once called it the world's most expensive paperweight during a lunch meeting. Michael Chun joked about repurposing it into a coffee table. At least then it'd be good for something, he said. Kesha said nothing, just noted the sarcasm. And noted too, the way Derek looked away every time the prototype was mentioned, like the failure still whispered something he couldn't quite bear to hear. One Friday evening, long after the others had left, she sat across from it. No mop, no gloves, just her, a notebook, and the sound of old metal breathing its last. She didn't touch it. She just listened, to the faint groans in the panels, the barely there hum behind the power feeds, the quiet ache of a thing built to live but never given the right kind of care. That night, she wrote a single line in her notebook. "This isn't broken, it's misunderstood." And in that moment, the cleaning lady's daughter knew something no engineer at Apex had figured out in 10 years. This wasn't a dead machine. It was a waiting one. The smell of oil never really left her. Even now, walking past state-of-the-art labs filled with sensors and diagnostic software, Kesha could still hear the soft clink of her grandfather's socket wrench tapping the edge of a 1957 Chevy. Could still feel the thick, warm air of his garage pressing against her skin. Could still see his hands, cracked, stained, steady, as they coaxed life from broken engines with nothing but patience and instinct. "Engines don't lie, girl," Samuel Williams used to say, crouched beside her under the hood of some forgotten relic. "People do. Paper does. But not these." She'd been only 12 when she watched him rebuild a rusted transmission with parts pulled from 5 different cars. No manual, no computer, just memory, intuition, and listening. He'd taught her to run her fingers along the block to feel for vibrations others missed, to close her eyes and hear the timing in the cough of an engine, to look for the story in the grime. "You gotta feel it first," he'd say, "before you ever touch a tool." Back then, she thought it was just a grandfather teaching his granddaughter how to survive. Now she realized, he had been preparing her for something no one could see coming. At Apex they used digital scanners and laser thermometers. Smart tools, smart tech, smart men. But still, the prototype sat silent. Kesha started using her brakes to sketch, not floor plans, feelings. Where pressure clustered, where noise lived, where it didn't. She wasn't guessing, she was listening the way Samuel taught her. Not for answers, but for the right questions. She cleaned the lab by day, but at night, she'd sit in her kitchen, flipping through old notebooks her grandfather left behind. Diagrams stained with grease. Notes in the margins. When the hum shifts mid-cycle, check airflow first. Trust the sound. He never went to college, but he could teach a Boeing mechanic something they'd never read in a manual. Apex's engineers laughed at her, mocked her for mopping near the dead machine. But what they didn't know was that every swipe of her cloth was strategic, every pause deliberate. She was mapping warmth, residue, hums, and underneath it all, rhythm. Because an engine, her grandfather had said, is like a heart. You can't diagnose it by staring. You have to feel when it's offbeat. So Kesha listened, in silence, in stillness, not with degrees, but with bloodline. And in the language of talk, timing and trust, the janitor's daughter was already speaking fluently. They called her just the janitor's daughter, mocked her hands, her silence, her curiosity. But when their $50 million prototype sat dead for a decade, it wasn't a world-class engineer who brought it back to life. It was the girl they never saw coming, and in 15 minutes, she dismantled every lie they believed about worth, intelligence, and power. The security gate buzzed with a low whine as Kesha Williams stepped through, her ID badge still stiff from being printed the day before. She adjusted her oversized cleaning tote on one shoulder, the scent of bleach and lemon polish clinging to her hoodie like armor. It was just after 6:00 a.m., 2 hours before the engineers arrived, her favorite time, when the building was quiet enough to hear yourself think. She moved through the sterile hallways with practiced ease. Her father had walked these same floors for 11 years, and when the heart attack came, sudden, cruel and uninvited, she didn't even hesitate. She had filled out the application while he was still in recovery. Most people didn't look at her twice. The receptionist barely made eye contact. One of the junior engineers passed her in the hallway without so much as a nod, eyes glued to his tablet. That was the thing about cleaning people. You were either invisible or in the way. By mid-morning, the lab was humming. Keycards beeped. Coffee machines hissed. Voices carried from the break room with just enough volume to remind you who the building was really for. Kesha pushed her supply cart through the glass-paneled corridor, careful not to touch anything. She didn't need the laminated reminders, authorized techs only, to know where she didn't belong. But still, her eyes lingered. At the far end of the lab stood it, the massive prototype engine, a hulking cold monument to everything they still couldn't figure out. 10 years dead, $50 million spent. Every top mind on the East Coast had tried. Every single one had failed. And now, it just sat there, like a king without a crown, or a body without a soul. Kesha paused to clean the lab table nearby. She didn't touch the machine. Not yet, just observed. Watched the way condensation built around one valve but not the others. Noted the fine powder near the intake vent. Dust, yes, but tinged with something darker. She was listening, the way her grandfather taught her. Engines talk, just not with words. Hey, a voice called out. You missed a spot. She turned. Derek Thompson, tall, tie, always too tight, smile always too smug. Make sure it's spotless. We've got investors visiting this week. Don't need them thinking we let just anyone wander around. A few others snickered behind him. She nodded once, saying nothing. Not because she didn't have words, but because silence, she had learned, was the only language arrogance didn't know how to respond to. She turned back to her work, cloth in hand, thoughts sharper than ever. No one saw it yet, not even her. But the daughter of the janitor was about to become the most dangerous mind in that building, and all she had to do was wait. Hey princess, Derek called across the lab, loud enough to interrupt the morning meeting. Think you could mop with a little more enthusiasm? This isn't your dad's basement. Laughter rippled through the room like broken glass over tile, sharp, fast and mean. Kesha didn't flinch. She just wrung out her mop with slow, practiced hands, and kept working. The first video was filmed that afternoon. Brad Mitchell angled his phone just right, capturing Kesha from behind, as she wiped down the outer casing of the engine. Cleaning lady tries to understand engineering, the caption read. By the time she got home, it had been shared in 3 company group chats. Hey Williams, Michael Chun smirked the next day, holding up a coffee-stained schematic. Think you can solve this one with a little elbow grease. Another laugh, another video, another whisper in the break room about how funny it was, how pathetic. She heard it all, every slur disguised as sarcasm, Every loaded, those people, comment slipped in with a chuckle. They thought her silence was stupidity, thought her nodding was submission. They didn't see the way she watched. They didn't notice how she lingered near the prototype, how she listened, not to the mockery, but to the faint metallic ticks of a system still breathing under layers of dust. The jokes kept coming. One morning she found a bottle of Windex on her cart with a note. For the next time you feel like diagnosing an engine problem. She threw it away without a word. During a staff lunch, someone made a fake schedule for her. 11 a.m. Learn what a piston is. 11:15 a.m. Polish floors with engineering dreams. Laughter again. Always laughter. Kesha took it all in. Stored it like oil in an engine. Quietly, precisely, waiting for pressure. What none of them realized was that every time they laughed, they gave her more data. They revealed how little they understood the very machine they claimed to own. Every theory they mocked, she wrote down later in her notebook. Not to prove them wrong, to prove her right. She'd seen this pattern before. In garages, in classrooms, in the slow rolling eyes of supervisors, who assumed you were only worth what your clothes cost or your skin didn't say. But arrogance was always the same, loud, careless, and unobservant. Kesha stayed silent, because silence sharpens. It listens, it waits, and while they made memes, she was memorizing the heartbeat of a machine none of them had ever truly heard. The room wasn't quiet. It was frozen. Thomas Reed didn't speak often, but when he did, even the air seemed to lean in. He stepped forward with a measured calm, his cane tapping softly against the tile, eyes not on the engine, but on her. "What's your name, young lady?" "Kesha Williams," she said. "Steady." Reed tilted his head slightly, studying her like a blueprint. "Williams, any relation to Samuel Williams from Fifth Avenue Garage?" Kesha blinked. "He was my grandfather." A slow smile crept across Reed's weathered face. Not amusement, recognition. "Well, I'll be," he said softly. "Sam taught me more about engines in one weekend than 4 years at Caltech. That man could listen to a motor the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat." The lab, once brimming with condescension, had turned painfully silent. Reed turned to the crowd. "Derek, Mitchell, Chun, Walsh. You all know how many engineers tried and failed to revive this engine, yes?" There were nods, hesitant, defensive. "Sam Williams could have done it blindfolded," Reed said. "And if this young woman's anything like him, I suggest we stop laughing and start paying attention." Derek tried to speak, but his voice caught. "With all due respect, sir, she's not an engineer." Reed raised an eyebrow. "And yet she's the only one in this building brave enough to accept the bet. That makes her more of an engineer than half of you." It landed like a punch wrapped in velvet. Jennifer Walsh fidgeted near the door. Brad Mitchell lowered his phone. Michael Chun cleared his throat, like he'd swallowed something wrong. Reed turned back to Kesha. "You've got my attention. I'd like to supervise this demonstration if that's all right with you." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. It would be an honor." "No," he said, his voice warm but firm. "The honor's mine." And with that, the entire lab shifted. Not because someone gave her permission, but because someone finally listened. She stood taller, not out of pride, but memory. The memory of her grandfather, oil-stained and brilliant, whispering lessons over the hum of machines. The memory of being a child holding a flashlight, while the world underestimated her. Now, they were all watching, but this time, she wasn't the joke. She was the storm they never saw coming. Kesha stepped toward the engine like it was an old friend. No gloves, no tools, just her and the silence. She circled it slowly, hand grazing the frame, with the care of someone touching history. The room held its breath. Dozens of eyes tracked her every move, but she didn't notice, or didn't care. Her focus was total. First, she closed her eyes. The crowd stirred. Derek chuckled under his breath. But Thomas Reed didn't blink. Kesha tilted her head and crouched near the base, placed her ear to the side panel, listened, then she stood, tapped twice near a sealed junction, and said, "Cooling system. Secondary line. It's clogged." Silence. She moved again, running her fingertips across the housing until she reached the top valve. "This pressure valve," she said, almost conversationally, "is calibrated for sea level." Another pause. The engineers frowned. Reed's eyes lit up. "We're 600 meters above sea level," Kesha continued. "The atmospheric pressure's lower here. You're getting false readings." Michael Chun muttered something under his breath. No one laughed. Then she stepped to the control panel, tapped a metal casing. "Your monitoring system is top tier," she said. "But you forgot to calibrate it for this engine's model. You've been chasing bad data for 10 years. A low gasp moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Reed stepped forward, inspecting each point she'd identified. He moved slowly, methodically, like he was verifying gospel, and then he looked up, eyes wide, not with disbelief, but with something rarer. "Awe." "She's right," he said softly. "She's completely right." No one spoke. Not Mitchell, not Chun, not Chun, not Chun, not Chun, not Cha. It looked like he'd just swallowed glass. Jennifer Walsh shrank near the exit. Kesha didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply stepped back from the engine like a surgeon, finishing a diagnosis. "These weren't hidden problems," she said. "You were just looking in the wrong places." Reed turned to face the team. "I've worked in aerospace, defense, energy. I've reviewed engines that powered satellites. And I have never seen someone diagnose a system this fast, or this precisely." He looked at Kesha. "How long have you been watching this engine?" 2 years, she said. "Since I started cleaning the lab." Another silence. But this one didn't hum with contempt. It pulsed with realization. Because they hadn't just underestimated her. They'd dismissed brilliance, simply because it didn't wear a badge or carry a degree. And now, standing in the glow of their shame, the janitor's daughter had just done what 50 engineers couldn't. She made the dead engine speak. Kesha didn't ask for tools. She walked to the wall cabinet, opened it like she'd done 100 times before, and selected only what she needed. No hesitation, no guesswork. A small wrench, a calibration key, a thermal patch sensor, still in its wrapper. Her hands moved with quiet authority. No one stopped her. Derek leaned against the far counter, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mitchell hovered near the power terminal, pretending to supervise. Reed stood beside the monitoring console, gaze sharp and steady. "Ready when you are, Miss Williams," he said. She nodded. First, the pressure valve. She removed it with 2 quick turns, adjusted the tension band, and replaced it with a modified seal. Then the secondary cooling line, blocked with residue, no one had bothered to inspect. She cleared it, flushed the line, reset the flow monitor. Then came the heart of it, the diagnostic system. She crouched, opened the casing, and scrolled through the firmware with calloused fingers. Found the calibration error tucked between 2 ignored data blocks, corrected it. Not once did her hands tremble. The room was so still, you could hear the tick of the emergency exit sign. "Okay," she said softly, standing. "Power it up." Mitchell opened his mouth, then closed it again. Reed stepped forward and flipped the master switch. For a moment nothing, then a low, slow hum. Not the stuttered groan they were used to. Not the hollow spin of failure. This was different, deeper, steady, like something ancient waking up. Lights on the panel began to flicker. Red, then amber, then green. One by one, the monitors lit up. Pressure levels stabilized. Heat distribution evened out. Voltage flow ticked into alignment. The hum deepened into a full-bodied roar, and the prototype, silent for 10 years, came alive. The floor vibrated, not violently, but rhythmically. The kind of vibration that meant power was cycling correctly. Energy was moving through veins, long thought dead. Kesha stepped back, just watched it breathe. The crowd around her didn't move. Jennifer Walsh's teacup clinked softly as it slipped from her grip and hit the counter. Michael Chun's tablet dropped from his hands. Derek took a step forward, mouth open but empty. "She did it," someone whispered. Reed smiled. "No, she revived it." Kesha exhaled slowly. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The engine roared behind her, strong and unapologetic, like it had been waiting all this time for someone who didn't need permission to listen, to trust her instincts, to believe. And as the lights on the control panel turned solid green, the engineers who once laughed now stood silent, witnesses to a resurrection they didn't deserve to understand. The video had once been a joke, A shaky, smug recording of a young black woman wiping down a machine she didn't understand, shared in group chats, captioned with emojis and backhanded sarcasm, played at happy hours like a meme with a mop. But now that same video was evidence. By Monday morning, the footage was on the desk of Apex's legal counsel, then in the inbox of the company's board. By noon, it had made its way to a journalist who'd been quietly tracking workplace discrimination in the tech sector, and by evening, it was viral again. Only this time, no one was laughing. Executives held a closed-door meeting as the engine ran flawlessly 2 floors below. Lines of code and spreadsheets couldn't soften the blow of what had just happened. The prototype worked perfectly, and it had been revived, not by their prized engineers, but by the woman mocked in their own hallways. Jennifer Walsh's HR files were pulled first. Emails, complaints, documentation, or lack of it. Then came Michael Chun's reports. 4 years of falsified maintenance logs, empty jargon, and rubber-stamped diagnostics. Brad Mitchell's project oversight portfolio didn't hold up much better. His reports contradicted themselves. The numbers didn't lie, even if he had. But the worst was Derek Thompson. Multiple approvals signed without review. Technical assessments that turned out to be copied from earlier, failed attempts. All while he led the charge in humiliating Kesha, using her silence as cover for his own incompetence. The audit team didn't need long. Arrogance leaves fingerprints. By Wednesday, Walsh was escorted out with her box of personal items, the company laptop still open to her private chat history. Mitchell's security clearance was revoked by lunch. Chun resigned before they could formally demote him. And Derek, he was summoned to the same boardroom where he used to brag. He didn't speak much. There wasn't anything left to defend. As the door closed behind him, the head of internal operations looked down at a copy of the printed transcript. "She wasn't trying to embarrass you," she said. "She was just trying to be heard." No one replied. Downstairs, the engine purred, smooth, steady, unbothered, and the janitor's daughter, who had once been their punchline, had become their reckoning. Because the real failure wasn't mechanical, it was moral. And now the system they built on ego and exclusion had finally turned in on itself, collapsing, one empty title at a time. The invitation came folded inside a navy envelope, the paper thick, the ink sharp. Boeing Aerospace requests the presence of Miss Kesha Williams for a private consultation regarding advanced diagnostics integration. She stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was real, but it was. Thomas Reed had made a call the night the engine roared back to life, said her name like it already belonged in a boardroom. The meeting wasn't in a janitor's closet or tucked in a back hallway. It was in a glass conference room on the 42nd floor, overlooking the skyline. Executives leaned in as she explained how she listens to machines, how she reads not just the error codes, but the silences, the missed vibrations, the subtle shifts in sound that no sensor can capture. They didn't ask about her degree. Reed had already told them the only credentials that mattered. She made a ghost engine breathe again. By the end of the week, she was offered a consulting position, senior level, 6 figures, full autonomy, her own team if she wanted it. She said yes, but on her terms, because she wasn't there to climb someone else's ladder. She was building a new one. Within 6 months, Kesha's intuitive diagnostics method was the subject of aerospace journals, featured in internal training, and studied by engineers from firms that once dismissed her kind as unqualified. But it wasn't just about recognition, it was about repair. So she launched the Williams Initiative, a mentorship program for underrepresented youth in STEM, not just scholarships, but hands-on training. She brought students into real labs, let them touch real engines, taught them what her grandfather taught her. Machines don't judge you by your clothes, your skin, or your accent, only by how well you listen. She wore a badge now, not for permission, but for the ones coming after her, the ones still scrubbing lab floors with brilliance in their back pockets. Reed visited often, watched her lead design teams twice her age. Sometimes he'd shake his head and say, "Sam would have been proud," to which she'd reply, "He already was." At Apex, her name wasn't just remembered, it was etched. A small bronze plaque beside the engine read, "Restored by Kesha Williams, Intuitive Diagnostician, Legacy Engineer." But the real monument wasn't metal. It was a quiet young woman who turned ridicule into revolution, who taught an entire industry that talent can wear work boots, carry cleaning cloths, and speak softly, until the whole world listens. She didn't rise to prove them wrong. She rose because she was always meant to. The plaque wasn't flashy, just brushed bronze, etched with quiet pride. Restored by Kesha Williams' Legacy in Motion, 2025. They mounted it beside the prototype engine, now the centerpiece of Apex's innovation floor. It ran daily, not because it had to, but because people came just to hear it. The hum had become legend, so had she. Visitors walked past it, heads tilted, engineers pausing mid-conversation, interns whispered, "That's the one she fixed." And the janitor's daughter became more than a story. She became the standard. Derek Thompson didn't return to Apex. He now worked at a small mechanic shop in the outskirts of Denver. His name wasn't on any door. His uniform had oil stains he didn't understand. The man who once sneered at blue-collar hands now answered to a lead tech who used to fetch his coffee during college internships. The same kid he never bothered to mentor. And every time Derek misdiagnosed a transmission, or fumbled a calibration, someone muttered, "Maybe we should ask Kesha." The joke burned, but it wasn't wrong. Jennifer Walsh's LinkedIn was quiet. Her HR career ended the day the viral clip resurfaced during a corporate background check. She now managed admin duties at a dental office. Clean slate, she told people. But the internet never forgets. As for Kesha, her office wasn't in a basement anymore. It sat on the 14th floor of a Boeing innovation tower, overlooking the same skyline, where her story had changed. She led a design team, working on propulsion units for deep space missions. The next engine would carry astronauts to Mars. And pinned to her bulletin board, just above her sketches, was a faded black and white photo. Samuel Williams, grease on his cheek, smile lopsided, arm around a 12-year-old girl, holding a wrench twice her size. Every morning, before the meetings and the designs, and the data briefs, she looked at that photo and whispered, "You still with me?" Because legacy wasn't about applause. It was about presence. About showing up, day after day, even when no one believes in you yet. In her mentorship program, she taught kids to hold tools with both hands, and to listen before diagnosing, to read machines the way she had, like language without words. One student asked her once, "What if they don't take me seriously?" She smiled. "Then you're already dangerous." Kesha never needed revenge. She built something better. Proof that brilliance doesn't need a pedigree, that dignity doesn't need permission, and that sometimes the smallest name tag in the building holds the biggest legacy of all. If this story moved you, share it. Not just for Kesha, but for every unseen genius cleaning floors, fixing engines, or being overlooked in silence. Tag someone who needs to be reminded. Your value isn't in your title, it's in your vision. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that prove one thing. Respect isn't given to the loudest voice, it's earned by the quietest truth.